Canada's travel guy, the renowned travel writer and storyteller, Jim Byers. Thank you so much for joining me and taking the time today on the Fact Up podcast, sir.
My pleasure. It's always fun to do these things.
Awesome. You spent 30 years at the Toronto Star. I don't want to date it, but you spent a lot of time in the Toronto Star, 5 years as the editor, the editor's, the travel section, of the editor. Now you're a freelancer. Your work is seen around the world, Dallas, Houston, Australia, and then boom, here comes a pandemic. How has it affected you on a personal level and on a professional level? And I can already tell because your head's already started to shake.
Yeah, I know. It's, I am lucky from a financial standpoint, Jim. I do about a third of my time is at Travel Pulse Canada, which is a website that covers the travel industry. So we're covering what's happening with Air Canada or with Go Away Travel or WestJet Vacations, whatever it may be. So that side of the business is still going pretty well. I am earning a salary, which is nice. Not everybody who's a freelancer is making a whole lot of money right now,
right?
As you know, that's a little tricky. So it's not always fun news these days. A lot of it's, layoffs and cancellations. Porter again this week just, extended their suspension of service by another 4 weeks. So yep. Porter's not going to fly again till June 29th. So that's it's not always the most enjoyable news to be talking about. As you would imagine, there's not a lot of call right now for nice, bright, hey, look where I'm going this week sort of thing. It would be kind of tone deaf, I think, if we were talking in joyous terms about all these great places we can go. So some of those things have kind of dried up. But I've had a couple little assignments pop up and some things that, what's the word that somebody was saying on TMAC or a thing I was at the other day, the important word of the day is to pivot. So, right. You have to be able to do something a little bit different, just like, you're doing your podcast and you've done a few things in your career and I've done a few, and you have to be able to look and see what's coming down the pipe and say, okay, I can't continue to write travel the way I used to, but maybe I can do this. So there certainly is a cause now over the last couple of days, especially with some of the loosening of travel restrictions, or at least the talk of doing so, that now people are starting to look a little bit forward and doing a few sort of, okay, what is travel going to look like, sort of thing. I've been doing some stuff on my own blog site called The Future of Travel, just to kind of say, here's what may be happening with hotels, here's what's happening with the cruise industry, what's going to happen with airfares, where are we going to be going. So, I'm trying to do some stories like that, but it's it's not the same, I did news for 25 to 30 years in the City Hall department, City Hall Bureau, the Star, and sports, where we crossed paths at some Raptors games over the years. And I miss that joyous, fun, telling a good travel story about fun people or a great destination. That's the part I miss. But, obviously a sense of perspective is very important here, and not being able to go to Miami or not being able to see my dad in California is a nuisance. But I'm healthy. I've got a nice house. Got a great family. I'd like to hug my kids sometime, but we're all in that situation. So right. I'm pretty lucky, all things considered.
Normally, and you nailed it, normally we'd be talking about, where your last trip was, where your next trip is, and travel tips and this and that. But I mean, the times dictate a different type of conversation. And we'll get into your blog post about, what the experience of travel will look like down the road. But sure. your personal travel style, what is it? And how has, how does the pandemic change that going forward?
Well, my personal travel style now is Loblaws, so that's not quite the same thing. I really like aisle 3. You got the pasta on the right. You got the Thai food on the left. It's really fantastic. No, it was funny. I was laughing with my wife the other day. My sister-in-law had cataract or surgery for eye surgery 6 or 8 weeks ago. She hasn't been driving her car, so I thought, okay, it's good. And the experts have all said, make sure you take the car out once a month for a spin. So I begged my sister-in-law. I said, I'm not going to crash. I promise. I'm a relatively good driver. I'll take the car for a spin. So I thought, okay, she's in Don Mills. And I thought, okay, where can I go? Because I got to get out of the house. I got to do something, right? So it almost felt like a little miniature travel assignment, Jim. I took her car and I drove along the 401. I thought, up north of the zoo in northeastern Scarborough, northeast Toronto, is really fantastic. There's tiny little 1-lane, 2-lane roads and old rickety bridges, and the Rouge River kind of flows through. And, for the first time in 2 months, I felt like I'd gone somewhere. and it was only Scarborough. But you know, there's not only Scarborough. Sorry, maybe you live in Scarborough, but it was still
I grew
within the
up just
city.
south of there.
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, it was in the city of Toronto, but you know,
Yeah.
it does show you, you know, you can get away and you can find great stories and interesting places to go, even in your own backyard. You know, just going for walks every day. My wife and I are like, I never noticed that house.
Right.
I never noticed you could get into the creek down this way. So, you know, I'm trying to do some of those sort of things. The biggest issue really for me is not being able to see my dad. I had 4 trips. I grew up in Northern California. I had 4 trips out to see my dad: March, April, May, June, all canceled. So from a personal standpoint, that's a drag. I do miss my dad, but there's certainly no other travel. It's the first time. I think I was telling somebody the other day. It's the first time in 11 years of being a travel writer. I don't have a ticket. I don't have a plan. I don't have a thought. Well, I've got a lot of thoughts,
Right.
but I don't have a plan or a ticket to go anywhere.
Right.
And I have no idea when the first thing I'm going to do is. I presume it will be something within Canada. I have talked to a few people in some local places about doing some work for them. That because obviously we're not going to be hopping on a plane and flying to Thailand or Rome or any place like that in the next couple months. So I think
Right.
we'll end up doing some local stuff. But hey, you know, Southern Ontario in the summer doesn't get much better than that anyway. So I'm not too unhappy.
I agree with you, and I've been writing road trip articles for at least the last 5 years, and the
Oh, really?
response
Okay.
oh yeah, and I don't brag about it, but I'll
Yeah.
brag about this.
Right.
Both of them went viral,
Oh, really?
and I'm super proud of it.
Good for you.
Um,
Where'd you go?
it was just 5 road trips, and it was the simple stuff 5 years ago. It was Tobermory,
Right.
it was Point Pelee.
Okay. Point Peely's awesome. Yeah.
Beautiful, and people were just constantly coming back to me and saying, I had no idea. Of course you don't have any idea, because you know, and there's no judgment, but sometimes people live in this small box when they don't
Of course.
cross the block or they don't go up
Right.
to the next corner.
Right.
And then it's just like, even the small things, like you mentioned with your wife, even the small things, and we're so preoccupied constantly on a
Right.
go-to-go basis that if you take a moment and you look around, you're like, oh my God, this is, and Scarborough's lovely this time of year, by the way.
Oh, it's fantastic. You know, the bluffs are awesome. We went in
Right.
there, and about a year ago, my dad came up with his lady friend, and hadn't seen how much work they'd done at the Guildwood or
Right.
at the Guild Inn for the longest time. Now, somebody came in and just totally blew the place away. Had a beautiful stonework, glasswork, gardens. You got all those old funky bits from the 1929 TD Bank towers and stuff. So there's a lot of really cool places. But I'm glad you mentioned Point Pelee, because Pelee Island is really fantastic, and Kingsville, great little funky town. Up
Beautiful
around
place.
Great County, there's some
Yeah.
fabulous hiking, and Meaford's a wonderful little community with great shopping, good food. I saw Joel Plaskett play up there a couple years ago, and
Cool.
I've been trying to do that every summer and do some little local tourism. And these towns are fantastic, you know.
Yeah.
And I think I talked about with somebody the other day that I think that a lot of the places we're going to want to go when this is over. Yeah, if you're in Toronto, you want to go to your local neighborhood restaurant and you want to go to the patio, of course. I can't wait for that first beer on the patio. But I think a lot of people are really going to be looking for a little smaller, quieter place where they can do a hike, not be bumping into people. You can't go to a concert anyway. So I think we're going to be some of those little smaller towns that you mentioned, and maybe not Tobermory, that can get a little crowded in the summer,
Yep.
but
Yep.
parts around sandbanks that aren't too populated. And I think a lot of those towns are going to do quite well. So I hope so, because a lot of those mom and pop places, you know, they really rely on July and August to probably make 75 or 80% of their yearly revenue.
Yeah, and it's funny, great minds, Jim, because early this morning I was talking to my partner about just this yearning of going to a park and just inhaling some super fresh air, change of
Yeah,
scenery. If I bump into a couple people, great. If not, even better. And I just,
right,
it's an escapism, but it's a conscious escapism. It's not that
right.
I'm miserable. It's just, I just want to get out and enjoy that hike.
Right, exactly.
Right.
Yeah, we've done a couple. I was actually really surprised, Jim. We went for a walk on Saturday, and I'm up in the North End, so we went over towards kind of like Edwards Gardens,
Hmm.
and I'm thinking, well, of course it's going to be locked, and it was open. So I
Right.
was quite surprised. We walked into the park, walked down through Wilkett Creek and up around through Sunnybrook, and
Hmm.
you know, kept our distance from people. We didn't wear a mask in the outside in a park.
Hmm.
Maybe you should, I don't know, but
Right.
we try to keep away from people as much as possible, and it's glorious. And you know, the city of Toronto is I've often said to people that you really can't understand Toronto, I think, until you've gone to one of the big parks, Trinity Bellwoods or Sunnybrook or one of the dells down by the Humber River in the middle of summer, and you watched all of the immigrant families, especially.
Hmm.
Maybe they live in a high-rise apartment in Thorncliffe or something,
Hmm.
and they all come out on a Saturday, and at 10 o'clock, the smoke's going, and the barbecue's going on, and the kids are playing ball and soccer and frisbee and water balloon tag, whatever it may be.
Hmm.
And so the music's going, and it's such a great way to appreciate the multiculturalism of Toronto and just the joy, of all of these families and the grandparents sitting there and everybody's dressed in their colorful stuff. And I love that part of Toronto. And this time of year, it's just fantastic.
You mentioned three neighborhoods already in this conversation that I mean, I grew up just north of the Guild and just south of the Zoo.
Okay.
And so my balcony would face south, which would mean that it faced the Guild. And it was at a time still where they had the Guild in a neon red sign that was glowing.
Oh, really? It's
And
a
I
little
used
more restrained now.
Oh, it's gorgeous now, but it still has that luster. You
Yeah.
mentioned Thorncliffe Park. My mom is in that neighborhood, and so
Okay.
it's an immigrant thing. The Greeks, the
Yeah.
Italians, the Portuguese used to go to the parks and
Right.
cook up lamb on a spit every
Right.
Easter.
Right. And now
Right?
it's whatever, goat or lamb or whatever, but people from, all over the world. And it's,
Right.
and I'm sure it's the same thing at the other parks. I'm pretty close to Sunnybrook and I can get there on my bike in about 10 minutes.
Right.
So that's that's my go-to. And it's really fantastic, and so that's a way you can almost kind of go and explore. And I don't know if you spent much time, Jim. I always keep reading about these great kind of Middle Eastern restaurants out on Lawrence East
Yep.
that I understand are absolutely fantastic.
Yep.
And Korean food, like North Yonge Street around Finch, just amazing Korean food, they tell
Yeah.
me. And I got to get out and try some of that a little bit more this year.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, my whole thing about food unifying people is always been part of my childhood. I grew up in a terrible neighborhood, and so you had every multicultural ethnicity in that high-rise apartment building I grew up in, and
Right.
so I used to joke that the seventh floor had sanctions against the 12th floor. That's all jokes. But the way everybody kept unified
Yeah.
was my mom would make a Greek dish and send it to the seventh floor neighbor. The
Okay.
Filipino neighbor would send us Filipino food.
Oh, that's
The
fantastic.
Thai neighbor would send Jamaican food. It was
Right.
just a unification of
That's
food,
awesome. Have you ever
right?
told that story?
I have written about it. Yes,
You should. Yeah.
it's on my
That's
site.
wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's
It's a
beautiful.
unification of humanity, right,
Yeah.
through food. But that being said, Jim, now you're talking about travel writing, unifying people,
Right.
stories that unify people
Sure.
in a society that's now seemingly more antisocial because of fear.
Right.
What is the job of the storyteller when it comes to travel to be able, how much more challenging is it for the travel storyteller to bring people together, especially after something like this?
Well, I mean, in some ways, I think it's easier. I think we're all just going to be so starved for human contact that I'm hoping that when this is all over, some of these, we always say these things, and we usually end up falling back into the same traps 5 or 10 years later. But I would like to think that we might be a little bit more sensitive, a little bit more culturally attuned to the rest of the world, and a little bit more accepting of each other. I maybe that's just Pollyanna thinking, but I'd like to think so. And I was on a call the other day with Catherine Ham from the LA Times, travel editor, and she was talking about the importance of travel and bringing people together. And we all read those inspirational quotes about, the sure way to end prejudice is to travel. And I've always believed that that's true. And that smile that when you don't speak someone's language, but they offer you that Filipino food that you've never had before, and you're at a little food stall and you're like, I don't know what this is, but I'm trying it, and you get a smile on your face, and then they smile, and you get this tremendous contact that it's just great. And the thing, the thing probably that I miss the most about travel is not seeing the sights. It's not a great beach. I mean, I've been lucky enough to do a couple of talks to tourism boards about what are travel editors looking for, what do travel writers want when they go on the road, and sometimes when I've done these, I've asked people, I'll say, okay, anybody here, raise your hand. Have you ever come back from a trip and tried to describe a sunset to your friend?
Mm-hmm.
And they say, no. I said, no, you don't come. Oh, Jim, you should have seen it. It was purple, and then it was pink, and then it was orange, and it was mauve. You might talk about a great hike or a great restaurant, but I think the thing that you really remember the most from a great trip is the people. And like I said, it's the guy at the stall making Thai soup or something that you've never tried before, a cab driver. I was, one of my favorite travel experiences of all time was in Kootenay Rockies in British Columbia. And we're in a little town, and I wish I could remember the name of it. Yes, drawing a blank. And
Kimberly.
they're known for kind of a German festival every summer.
Kimberly.
And some of the buildings are kind of done up in that kind of German style. And
Kimberly. It's Kimberly, BC.
Yeah, it's near Kimberly, right? Yeah. So, thank you. And so I'm in there, and there's like a giant statue with a little guy, like a leprechaun kind of guy. And you put a toonie in, and he comes out. And he's got his lederhosen and an accordion, and he plays for 30 seconds, and the doors close, and he goes back in.
$1. That costs $1.
Yeah, like a cuckoo clock. Yeah, the loony.
It's awesome.
So I was talking to the girl that was giving me a tour in Kimberley, and she said, "Well, the guy who played the accordion and did the yodeling works in the shop next door." And I said, "He does what?" She said, "He's right over there right now, Audi Unterberger." I said, "Of course, right?" Yeah. So I said, "Let's go talk to him, right? Whatever we were going to do, wherever we were going to go to lunch." I said, "Forget it. I want to go talk to the singing, yodeling Audi Unterberger." So I go into the store, and he's there behind the counter, and he's selling cassettes and CDs and crystals, whatever they were. And he said, "Would you like me to play for you?" And I said, "Are you kidding?"
Wow.
Yes. So he goes back in the room. He comes back with his little Sound of Music felt hat and a little feather in it. And he's got his little vest on. He proceeds to play the accordion for about 35, 40 seconds, and then breaks into like this yodeling, whatever, I'm not going to try it, for like another 20 seconds, and then goes back to the accordion and finishes his song. And I took a picture. I held my camera kind of down here so that I could see him and look him in his eye and not have him think that I'm just taking photos. And I just kind of trained it towards him and took like 8 or 10 shots in a row. And he had just finished, and I'm applauding or whatever, and he had the biggest grin on his face. And to me, it's the best picture I've ever taken. I've taken lovely sunset shots and great beach photos and mountains, but this to me is my favorite photo of all time, because this guy, he just radiates joy. Somebody wanted to hear his music, and he had his CDs over in the corner. I didn't buy any. But he did have his, there's only so far that an accordion yodeling act is going to take you, right? But he was just an absolute treasure. And I think back, there's a woman that passed away about a couple months ago. I think Charlotte Kavanaugh. I know it was Kavanaugh. Colette Kavanaugh. My wife's reminding me of the name.
Okay.
Who was just fantastic, and she ran this little B&B outside of St. John's, and she would teach you to cook lobster and cod cheeks, and then you dance around the room. She gave you like sou'westers to put on and an ugly stick, those ugly sticks they have in Newfoundland, and you bang the ugly stick and you ran around her dining room table singing sea shanty songs, and she was crazy, but she was fantastic, and so, two opposite ends of Canada, and probably two of the most joyous, wonderful people I've ever met in the travel business. So.
It's again, when I was first starting out, it was always about the numbers for tourism boards, and I would always tell them, look, I don't have astronomical numbers, but what I can tell you is that you can't put a number on the experiences that you have, because people are what really make the experience.
Right, I agree.
And I host food tours in the city, and it's all about unifying people, again, through food, through travel experiences.
Okay, so I know where my next tour of Toronto is going to be. Okay?
That's it.
Let's do it.
But the fundamental lesson here is it's a unification of people. It's not about the selfie stick. I'm 43, man. I'm old school. All right. It's about bringing people together. That said, does this kind of amplify the desire for people to live in the moment more so, and get rid of that kind of, here I am with a selfie stick and I'm posing in front of this and I'm doing this, and kind of clotheslining people?
I gotta hope so. Not to be biased towards influencers. I mean, I have some deals that I've done with people, but I don't do selfies by and large. Every once in a while, I'll maybe a couple times a year. I've read a lot lately, Jim, about this sort of thing. In the age of influencers. My wife and I were just talking about that a few minutes ago when we were out on our walk, and I think it's going to. I don't think you can show up 3 months from now in Machu Picchu or the beach in Waikiki, wherever it may be, with your selfie stick and say, "Hey, look at me, I'm wearing the latest bathing suit." I think it's just not going to play well, certainly over the next 4, 5, 6 months. I hope that it lasts longer than that kind of abeyance is a little bit more permanent. maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm just jealous. I don't know. I'm not in that situation. Oddly enough, nobody ever asked me to pose in a bathing suit in Waikiki.
Right.
I don't get it. I just don't get it.
Right.
So I think that a lot of that will die down. But the underlying economic factors that brought that in, I'm not so sure those are really going to change. So,
Right. Right.
yeah.
What do you feel travelers need to feel as if they are being taken care of and not sanitized, but that they feel that what the hotel they're staying in, the Airbnb, which is a company that just released information about you can't stay in a room for at least 24 hours until the host cleans it out.
Right, right.
What other things do you think people and travelers will need to feel peace of mind that they're being taken care of in a safe and healthy manner going forward, be it in a hotel, a plane, a train, a bus, no matter what?
I think it's going to be all of those things. The tourism minister from Jamaica, or Barbados, excuse me, was talking the other day at one of our travelpulse.com Facebook pages, live chats. And he was saying they want to have people, doctors or medical staff on the ground when people land, have their temperatures taken as a way to kind of show that we're on top of this. I think the personal service is going to become more important. At the same time, it's trickier because they want to have more virtual check-ins. Hilton today just sent out a press release saying that they're partnering with Lysol. We'll hold the Lysol jokes for now.
Right.
Partnering with Lysol and the Mayo Clinic, very well respected, maybe the most respected hospital medical clinic in the United States. That they'll be getting advice to the Mayo Clinic and using Lysol disinfectant, and they'll have wipes, and they're taking care of the remotes, and they're sanitizing the room and sealing the room with a little piece of tape to show that nobody has gone into this room. Like James Bond leaving the little hair on the side of the door, so nobody's come in. Mm-hmm. So they're going to leave a piece of tape or something there, so nobody will have come in. You'll know that room is sanitized, and then it's going to be clean. So I think those things are all very important. But I'm also wondering, and I'm curious what you think on this, Jim, but I don't know if people are going to want to travel to the same places that they always did. Mm-hmm. It seems to me that if you're in a developing country, you're going to have some problems committing older travelers, especially, that might feel that they're more susceptible, that they may not want to travel to a country where they can't rely on the medical care, or they don't think they can rely on the medical care. Right. So I get the feeling that a lot of people, maybe in their 60s and 70s, might be thinking, maybe we won't go to Southeast Asia this year. Maybe we won't go to a smaller country in South America. Maybe let's stick to someplace in North America, or, Panama, I understand, has pretty good medical tourism. Australia, New Zealand, places like that, Japan, a little bit more on the modern side, or say within Canada. So I think the way people will travel will be a little bit different. Right. I also read something that I thought was quite interesting. There was kind of a social compact kind of a comment where somebody had said, if you have the money to go to a place like, say, Easter Island or the Maldives or the Seychelles or some really remote kind of place, the Orkney Islands or something, that you really have to think twice, because if you're asymptomatic, if you're not sure you're carrying the virus, and you go to a really small place with one small hospital and 2 doctors, and you cause an infection, you could kill just dozens, hundreds, thousands.
Exactly. Yeah.
So I think that's a social responsibility that all of us from more developed countries, that maybe, how much money anybody's is going to have to travel after all of this is over is another story, right? Because you can say, oh, it's going to be great for Canadian travel because we can't afford, or there's no flights to anywhere else in the world. But how many people, the casual travelers that go to a mom and pop place in Point Pelee, are they even going to have the money to take a 3-day weekend? I don't know. I just don't know.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, we use the word pivot. I'm going to pivot here. I'm going to go more personal.
Please. Sure.
Pinpoint the moment where you said travel is what I want to do.
I don't think there was any one thing. I think the thing that I remember the first time I said to myself, I think I want to be a travel writer. So was probably, I was down at an event. I'll backtrack a little bit. Before I did travel, I did sports, where you and I would run into each other at Raptors games.
Right.
Before I did sports, I was at the City Hall Bureau of the Toronto Star. So when I was doing that, I was covering the Toronto's Olympic bid, when Toronto was bidding against Atlanta. Mm-hmm. So I started to cover, because, it's the International Olympic Committee, and these guys live large. Like, I got to tell you, all those stories you've read about the way that these guys spend money and the lavish, crazy parties and everything, it's all true, especially back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
So, the first meeting I went to cover an IOC meeting was in Istanbul.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, well, Greece was bidding because Athens was bidding against Toronto. So I flew to Athens. And then I thought, well, as long as I'm in Athens, I'll go out to one of the islands, So I went to a couple of days on Paros.
Mm-hmm.
And then another meeting was in Puerto Rico. And then the decision where we lost to Atlanta, sadly,
Mm-hmm.
was in Japan. So I started to think at that point, I think that's kind of when I was thinking, this Olympic gig is pretty good. I was pretty crushed when we lost because I had a book planned and I was going to travel all over the world and go to all the other Olympics. But as it turned out, I then covered Vancouver's Olympic bid and got to do more of it. So I would say probably even like the late 80s, early 90s,
Mm-hmm.
I kind of thought this would be something I'd want to do when I was older. I kind of thought I'd want to do it maybe when I was 60 or something. The opportunity came when I was, I don't know, 51, 52, I can't remember.
Right.
And I thought, I'm not passing this up. The fellow who was in charge of hiring for the travel section was also my former sports editor when I was the deputy sports editor at the Star.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of helped a little bit. And I was a little lucky to get the job, but I also thought about it. I sort of thought, okay, let's start writing some travel stories. And I did probably 5 or 6 for the travel editor in the early 2000s. Sometimes when I would travel for the Raptors games, I would go and say, okay, as long as I'm here, I'm in LA, let's go do a story on some new hotels or new funky areas of Los Angeles to write about. So I had kind of a plan, and I worked towards it, and I was lucky to get it, but it wasn't all luck, to be honest.
Right. What excites you about travel these days? What excites you about your job now? Forget the pandemic. What excited you about your job, the evolution of Jim Byers' passion travel from the late 80s, early 90s to 2019, 2020?
I had this conversation once. I like to relay the story. When I'd been travel editor for maybe a year, and a buddy of mine who was a very serious, strong newsman, we'd worked together at the City Hall Bureau a couple times, and he'd been a business reporter, and he was actually very serious, an excellent reporter, but not a life of the party kind of guy. And he came over to me one day when I was the travel editor. He said, "So Byers," he says, "what's up with being travel editor? Like, isn't that boring?" And I said, what did you just say?" And he said, don't you think that's kind of boring?" And I said, "Well, John, let me look at it this way. I said, travel writing is, if you're asking me, am I bored about writing about skiing, architecture, museums, food, beer, surfing, hiking, wine, Australia, Japan, Quebec, British Columbia, San Francisco? Yeah, you wouldn't like it. It's no good, And he sort of said, "Well, gee, I never thought about it that way." Right. I said, "Well, I did. And that's why I'm the travel editor, and you're still in the business section, And he loved the business section. He was great. He wouldn't have wanted to be a travel editor. All I'm saying is, and you would agree with me, I'm sure you would agree, is that travel can be whatever you want it to be. It can be a guy making Stradivarius violins in a small factory in Genoa or wherever they may be. It can be a guy to at Ayers Rock, Uluru in Australia, an Aboriginal guy, explaining the concept or the origins of a didgeridoo. It's the world, right? And there's that old saying as well: if you're tired of travel, you're tired of the world. And for me, it's always inspiring. It's always fun. It's a combination. I like to go back to familiar places. I'm a big Hawaii guy. You can see my ukulele up there.
Yep.
In the corner. So I'm a big guy in Hawaii. Growing up in California, that's always nice to go home. So I like doing those familiar trips. But whenever I can go someplace that I've never been, it's always just so cool. And just walking down the street and everybody, the tour guide's turning left, I'm going to turn right because I want to see what's around the corner. And I think I sometimes drive my wife a little bit crazy because we're driving down the road and I'm thinking, well, where do you think that goes? And I think we were in Ireland once and we're driving around on our way up towards Northern Ireland, and I saw this road and something told me to pull over. So we pulled over and we drive down this little road and we see this beautiful village and there's horses gathering in the pastures, and then we look over and there's this mysterious castle off in the distance. It was like a Monty Python film, it's Camelot, So we drive down and we find, and I found out later that it's the castle of where Lord Mountbatten lived before he was blown up by the IRA. And it was a very cool little village. And I thought, okay, there's something I didn't really know. And it was only because something sort of said, Jim, turn left. you know. So it was, I love those kind of moments, you know, just when, like the Audi Unterberger, you know, I'm just expecting to wander around this little Platz or whatever they call it in Kimberley, BC, and somebody introduces me to the 1958 accordion champion of Austria. I'm like, it's fantastic, you know, it's just great.
You know, throughout the podcast, I've been watching your face and what makes you smile the most. I was going to list a few places, right, that have made you smile over the years.
Right.
And I wanted you to kind of give me your most memorable kind of, you know, when you hear somebody say something and then your soul kind of melts a little. You're like, oh, that place, right?
That place, yeah.
I'm going to give you some places, but you've already mentioned them. I'm going to say Rome.
Rome. Okay. Rome is where I met my wife.
Right.
My mother told me I was conceived in Rome. That might be too much information for a podcast. I apologize. She always told me this is true. My dad said the same thing. So I actually met my wife. She says we met in Florence, and we spent our time together in Florence, but we basically met on a train between Rome and Florence, 1979 after I graduated from college, and California kid, and she's Don Mills girl. Mm-hmm. And there we go. So that's always very cool. Right. To go back to Italy, that's a very special place. What else? Come on, keep
I got California.
Yeah, California. See my dad, my family. Went to school in LA, so it's always nice to go back. And you know, we talked about basketball earlier. I went to my first year. I went to UCLA for my undergrad. I didn't do graduate, so it's the only college I did. Mm-hmm. But I was there for John Wooden's last year. Mm-hmm. So that was a very cool experience. Every time I go back to campus, that always just puts a smile on my face, and I end up buying another $75 sweatshirt that I don't need. My wife became a big basketball fan last year, watching the Raptors. So when we were in LA in February, and we went to a UCLA Washington game, and she loved it probably even more than I did. So right. that put a big smile on my face. So that's always great. I love exploring anywhere in California.
Africa,
I went once when I was covering the IOC, when I was covering Vancouver's bid. We went to Senegal, which was a very disturbing experience, to be honest. Mm-hmm. There's an island there called Ile Goree, Goree. There was a disembarkation point for West African slaves. Mm-hmm. You know, you go and you see these little tiny cells with 8 or 10 people, and dank and dark and rusty jail cell and cell bars, and no air and no washroom facilities or anything, and it's completely horrifying. Mm-hmm. Probably the worst thing I've seen in my life. Counter that with a trip in October. We went to South Africa. And did Cape Town, which was fantastic. Mm-hmm. I thought Vancouver was the most beautiful city I've seen. No, it's not. Vancouver's beautiful, but it's not as pretty as Cape Town. Mm-hmm. Really dramatic mountains. The coast is right there. Gorgeous beaches, great food, really nice people. We did a safari outside of Greater Kruger National Park, went up to the winelands. South Africa, you know, that first time you're in a Jeep and the guy stops the Jeep 10 feet, 15 feet from a pride of lions, your stomach just leaps right through your mouth. And it was pretty, we kept looking at each other, because my wife was able to come on that one as well. And we all just kept looking at each other going, this can't be real. You know? Right. So it took me a long time to finally get there, but we did. So love to go back. It's very cool.
You know, it's there's a lot of stories that are coming out of this current pandemic about inspiration and motivation, and a kind of a faith in humanity once again, and a faith in nature.
Yes.
What have you seen or experienced personally that has restored your faith?
I don't think I really ever lost it. So I don't know about being restored. I like to think I'm a pretty positive person. I'm not necessarily a religious person, but I'm a fairly positive. I believe in the good in people. I'd rather give somebody $3 on the street and have it spend it on something they shouldn't than walk past someone. So, you know, that's fine. I don't, there have been a few times, I'll say, along the way that were kind of pseudo-religious kind of experiences. One was probably, I think I mentioned Easter Island earlier. Mm-hmm. I got lucky enough to go to an adventure travel conference in Chile about 5 years ago. And one of the trips they had beforehand was to Easter Island. And I'm one of those kids that grew up thumbing through National Geographic, you know, by the hour, and reading atlases. And Easter Island to me was like the most amazing destination I could possibly imagine in the world. So we got up one morning at about 5 a.m. and they drove us down in the dark, down this rickety Jeep down the hill, down to the beach, where some of those statues, the famous statues of Easter Island, they're called Moai, M-O-A-I,
Yep. Yep.
and they're facing the with backs to the water, but right near the beach. And it's kind of a nice morning, but a little on the cool side, and the mist is kind of swirling around this meadow, and we can hear there's wild horses on the island, and you can hear the babies kind of whinnying for their mothers, and the mother is answering back. You can't see them, but you can hear them, and the fog's kind of swirling around them, and then the fog starts to lift as the temperature rises, and then you see that first ray of sun rising between two of these statues on Easter Island, 3,000 miles from Hawaii, 3,000 miles from Chile. I had no idea it was that far. It's a 5-hour flight from Chile mainland to Easter Island. So there I am in the middle of the Pacific Ocean thinking, okay, this is very, very cool. I would say that in Uluru or Ayers Rock in Australia, which is a very strong religious place for the natives of Australia, the Aboriginal peoples. It was really spectacular. You stand there and you watch that at sunset. One was at sunrise, one was at sunset. And I kind of felt something, it just seemed a very peaceful, beautiful place. They asked you not to climb. It was still legal to climb at the time. And I said, no, the people who come from this continent do not want me to climb this rock. It's sacred to them. I'm not about to do that.
Right.
Here in Canada, as much as I told you I love California and Hawaii, and I do, I've never looked at a beach and thought, oh my God, the power of the being that created this. But when I go to the mountains, when I go to Banff or Waterton Lakes in Alberta or Lake Louise, have you been to Moraine Lake?
Yes, I have.
Which is just below Banff. Yeah,
Beautiful.
It's even prettier than Lake Louise. It's so amazing. We rented a canoe and paddled around there for half an hour. I'm just looking up at the mountains and the greenery and the blue sky. And when you're in the mountains, there's something really awe-inspiring about that majesty and the eons of rock and wind and rain and carving out shapes of rock all over the world. And so, the Rockies to me are an amazing spot. Newfoundland, of course, I love. Speaking of Canada, Newfoundland and the best people. I mean, you get great scenery and the best people, hands down, in all of Canada. So I'm a big Newfoundland guy.
I was in Iceland once, and I ran into someone who spoke really just Canadian English, if that's such a thing.
Yeah.
There was no accent whatsoever, and I asked him. I said, "Where are you from? Are you from BC or Calgary? Where's this little museum in Vik, in the south of Iceland?" He's like, "No, man, I'm from the fjords in northwest Iceland." And I said, "Oh my God, you sound like you're from like Calgary, right?"
Right.
He says, "Iceland's really beautiful, but there's nothing quite like the Canadian Rockies."
Oh, okay. That's
cool.
what
he said to me.
Yeah.
On a further note, I agree as well. On a further note, there's a place in, you mentioned Greece earlier in Paros. My mom's from Rhodes in the southeast.
Okay.
And so every time I land in Rhodes, I kiss the tarmac because I feel like that's where my soul lives.
Yeah.
I'm speechless. I'm breathless. I become butter.
Right.
My question for you is, where does your soul live, Jim Byers?
Probably Hawaii, I would say. Yeah. We went for the first time in '68, Jim. My parents, like growing up in California, my impression of the water was like Santa Cruz. It's kind of gray. It's probably, on a good day, it's probably 58 Fahrenheit. You don't want to swim in that for more than like 5 or 6 minutes. And it's very beautiful. The coastline of San Francisco is gorgeous, but it's not a place you go to and swim and all the rest of that. So 1968, we go to Hawaii. I still, at least in my mind, seem to imagine or remember looking up. We landed in Honolulu. I smell the salt air. I see the palm trees. I see the green mountains, jagged peaks of Oahu. And I just thought, the smell of the flowers almost on the air. You can maybe just imagine it, but I can almost smell that every time I land. We did a lot of family trips as a kid. We pretty much went every couple of years. Our kids would go with us when we have 3 kids, and they used to come every couple of years. My mom and dad would say, "Look, you guys live 2,500 miles away. We're going to spend a week, 10 days together once a year, every 2 years. We're going to Hawaii." We would go to the same place often. My mom would stand up on, she's been gone about 13, 16 years now. But my mom would sit up on the balcony with like a football or frisbee and throw it to the grandkids in the water. And then we'd throw it back up on the balcony and she'd throw it back. So, I go to Maui and I'm the same way. It's butter. I melt. I just kind of go, oh.
Right.
All my cares in the world just kind of disappear. And I would say probably Maui more than the other islands, but any place in Hawaii. I love the warm weather. I love the people. Um, People are extraordinary. I love the language, and I love the music. So it's a really beautiful language. Two words. I mean, the word aloha, which does not just mean hello and goodbye. It's also love. It's a beautiful word. There's also a word, ohana, in Hawaiian that I really love. And what I love about it is it technically means family, but it also means anybody who's really special to you. So probably growing up in a big Greek family, you probably have some sense of this as well, right? It's family. You don't have to be family to be family.
Right.
So I think that's the thing with Hawaiians. They live large. They have you ever had a Hawaiian plate lunch? Have you ever heard of a Hawaiian plate lunch? You're
I
a food guy.
haven't. No, but I've heard
Okay,
of it. Yeah.
a Hawaiian plate lunch has to be seen to be believed.
Right.
There's like usually chicken or salmon,
Mhm.
2 scoops of rice, a scoop of potato salad, and a taro, which is like more starch.
Right.
So there's no wonder you see like 350-pound Hawaiian sumo wrestlers, right? Because these guys love their carbs, and they're just lovely, warm, embracing people. And they're all on these big family picnics every Friday, Saturday, Sunday, wherever they can. All the Hawaiians, all of them, and all of their extended families just rush off to the beach or their favorite little spot, and it's very cool. So yeah, that's my happy place.
That's beautiful. And that relates to me on so many levels, because as Greeks, we want to make you feel guilty. Guilt is a big part of the culture. But on a positive note to the guilt, we feel like the way we become more family is through food.
Yes, of
And
course.
if you can unify people through food, through culture, through drink, we
Right.
will then make you feel guilty for not eating enough food
Exactly. Yeah.
and drinking enough.
Not
Right?
like, and not unlike Italians, I suppose. Yeah.
That's the same thing. One
Where,
face, one race with us.
where do you do your food tours?
I do them in Greektown.
Do you? Okay,
In on
fantastic.
the Danforth, but then like you, see, that's the thing. We are in, I feel like we've crossed paths in a circle. I'm the same guy where if we're driving along the road, I'm going to stop and go down that street because
Right.
that's calling me, right?
Yeah,
It's the
exactly.
same thing with the food tours. It's on the main strip, but the beauty is that we go off the beaten path. And
Nice.
so,
Okay.
yes, this is the touristy part, but wait a second. I'm going to take you through the crevices of Greektown and show you the soul of the
Right.
community.
That's what I want to do. I don't need to go to the same places that have been there for 40 or 50 years, and as great as they are. And I haven't spent much time there in the last couple of years. We used to do a kind of a bunch of us friends all around the same age with kids in the same school would go down once a year and do a little assault on the Danforth type of thing.
Right.
It's been a few years since we did that, so okay, I'm signing up. We're doing one of these tours. It'd be
Oh
fantastic.
man, it'd be great. But you know what? I have them on hiatus right now because,
Well, of course, yeah.
but I do food packages. So I compile a package where I combine sweet and savory Greek flavors and I deliver them to you. I've been doing this now for a week and a half.
Oh, that's smart.
I've
Okay,
taken the food tours and making them now
right.
virtual.
You
Uh,
pivoted.
I've pivoted,
There you
right?
go. There you go.
Jim Byers, you are a legend in my books, my friend. We've crossed paths, but never quite conversed quite like this before.
No,
Um,
we'll do this again, but we'll do it in person as soon as we can.
Absolutely.
I
And
can't wait. It'd be
I
awesome.
thank you. I thank you so much for taking the time, my friend.
Right.
I wish you all the best. And, in your world, I hope everyone continues to stay safe and healthy.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, man. Take care, man.
Thank you so much,
All
Jim.
right. See you soon.
Ciao.